Cuba 2025, heaven or hell. That is a very dramatic, a question mark. That is a very dramatic title. Let me give it some subtitles and we'll carry on. Cuba, heaven or hell for tourists. People like all of you in this room going to Cuba, is it going to be heaven or is it going to be hell for you? We'll have that answer shortly. And then what about the people you're going to interact with? The Cubans. Is it living there 2025 today? Life in Cuba right now, April, no, I'm sorry, 1 May is heaven or hell. And we have, oh, hi, my name is Leslie Klein. The program committee is thrilled to present a discussion about everything Cuba, and we're going to go into great depth on Cuba. Why am I qualified to talk about Cuba? Well, I've been there 4 times, all legally. Cuba is the only country on the planet that requires a U.S. visa. The U.S. visa to leave the country to legally go to Cuba. And coming back, it's even more important to have that visa in case you don't want your passports confiscated for going there illegally. I taught classes at 3 community colleges about Cuba, life in Cuba, going to Cuba legally, illegally. Also, I taught American foreign policy at the University of Washington. The nice thing about going to Cuba legally is you get that U.S. visa and it is required by U.S. law that you interact with Cuban people. And they don't consider the waiters and the hotel staff as interactions. You really must spend your entire day meeting all types of Cubans at all types of socioeconomic levels. I have talked to the former Cuban UN ambassador. I've talked to full professors teaching Cuban foreign policy at the University of Havana. I've talked to the owners of the American cars you see roaming around everywhere. I've talked to artists. I've talked to private business owners. I've talked to state-run business owners. I've talked to the workers. I've talked to the children of Cuba. It's very interesting. In all cases, I also have talked to the pedicab drivers and the street sweepers. These are all important jobs, and each of these people has a different view. Cuba, and let's talk a little bit about Cuba. You can see, in order to fly from Miami to Havana, it's not 90 miles, it's about 170 miles. Legally, even get on the airplane, you must present when you check in the U.S. visa and the Cuban visa. Cuba has a visa too. And why do they have a visa? Anyone know? Money. They need foreign currency, and these visas are only payable in dollars. So that's why they have visas. But
how much is the visa?
What?
How much?
How much? The Cuban visa was $60 last time. It's been cheaper. And because you're on a people-to-people program, you must keep written documentation about your trip. You have to describe it day by day. You need to keep it for 7 years. And at any time, someone from the government could come up to you and say, show me your written record or hand me your passport. So that has never happened. And I've never heard of anyone with that problem. But that's how you get there. And let's talk a little more geography. Well, let me carefully climb up now that they have a safety railing back there. Okay. What can I say? The population of Cuba is, no one knows. The Cubans do not keep official records. The last census they did in Cuba was in 2014. And there were 12.5 million Cubans, 2.5 living in Havana. Those are accurate numbers. And The 2024 census that was supposed to be released in December and available when I was there in February has been delayed due to logistical problems. That's what the government says. The estimate for the population as of today is somewhere around 9.7 million. No one knows how many people live in Havana. That's a 20% drop in population in 6 years. Because I know it was approaching 13 million, they were saying. Again, no one knows, but they were saying. So it's gone from 13 to 9.7 in 6 years. Why? Was it COVID? Did it kill lots of people because they didn't have vaccinations? Was it the two major hurricanes that leveled the country pretty thoroughly? Or was there another reason why the population is one of the few countries on the planet to have fewer people, maybe Ukraine, to have fewer people today than they had 6 years ago? Okay, so right here where my finger is Santiago de Cuba, right on this straight line in this little harbor. That's a very important city. That's where Teddy Roosevelt rode up San Juan Hill. We'll talk about that briefly in a moment. That's where Castro came out of the mountains. There's a bunch of mountains. He came out and went to Santiago de Cuba twice. The first time he was captured and thrown in jail. The second time he spoke in the square of Santiago de Cuba. Oh, I should say, I've been to every place in Cuba. I have been all over the country. I have seen the square. I've seen the balcony where Castro gave his first speeches at the start of the final revolution. And then he marched up the road to Havana. Now, Cuba from west to east is 770 miles, about the distance from Seattle to Salt Lake City. It's the biggest island in the Caribbean. It's 110 miles wide. It's the widest areas. Well, how does one get from Havana, the capital city, to Santiago de Cuba? Well, you can't fly because the internal aircrafts, the internal airlines in Havana has been grounded since COVID. So it's down for maintenance. It's down for lack of fuel. Can't take the train. That's also down for maintenance and then down for lack of fuel. But you can take a bus, and it's not an air-conditioned bus. And I've seen these buses. It's packed, every seat taken, plus standing room. I guess the standing room is a little cheaper seats. And to go the 500 miles from Havana to Santiago de Cuba takes 3.5 days by a bus. Un-air-conditioned bus, crowded the whole way. Now, this is Guantanamo Bay, right out there. I'm looking at it, I can see the dock. I don't think Ted Taylor made it today. Are you here, Ted? I gave a lecture with Ted Taylor. He was the CB commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we had a lecture he and I did in 2019 when I got back the previous time from Cuba. He was in charge of the third of the defense of Guantanamo Bay, manning the perimeter, and he said his troops could easily hold out for 35 minutes if the Cubans were attacking, and then they'd have to surrender. So, Cuba is a very interesting place. What else can I say about Cuba? Or have we, oh, let's talk about May Day. I asked a question, some of you weren't here. It's May Day, and I see a few of you are legally dressed for May Day. That means red. May Day in all communist countries is the end. I see Jackie's got red on too. Good for you, Jackie, you're safe. It's the workers' paradise holiday. And you can see in Havana, that is Revolutionary Square down there. And you notice everyone's wearing red. And this is where Castro spoke to 1 million people, so they say, no counts. Remember, nothing is known in Cuba. It's all stories. He's spoke to 1 million people. This is a typical May Day. The statue I want to point out is right there. That monument is the Jose Marti monument. Jose Marti was a hero of the Cuban Revolution in the 1880s, killed by the Spanish, and this structure was the tallest structure in Cuba for a long time, but recently they built a hotel far, far away from the structure that's taller, and there are Jose Marti statues, plazas, streets. The airport of Havana in Havana is known as the Jose Marti Airport. He is everywhere. Now, who is not everywhere is Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, and the current president, whose name I never even heard mentioned once, Miguel Diaz-Canel. He is the current president. So things are not quite as you would expect in a communist country. But the question is, on May Day, if you're not wearing red and you're walking the streets of Havana, are you going to be gathered up, arrested, thrown in jail, have a month's salary confiscated? This is a communist country, and I forgot to say this. Cuba is a Karl Marx exact communist country. Cuba is a very, very, very complicated place. It's part of why I'm drawn to it. And before we go into the dark or the hell part, which we will probably spend far too much time on, let me tell you why I have gone to Cuba 4 times. I love the place. And I love it because it's complicated. Nothing is clear. The rules in Cuba can change from morning to night. Janice was with me on my second trip in 2014. We were going to a paladara, which is a private restaurant. And in the morning, the government had changed the rules for tourists going there because the paladars were taking business away from the state restaurants that I mentioned complicated. So in the morning, they declared that tour buses can now go no closer than 4 blocks to the restaurant. And you get off the bus and you walk. And your guide can't go with you, and nor can the bus driver. So, and this was at night. And even in 2014, there are no streetlights. But there are plenty of potholes that have been there forever. They all have a name. And so, and on the path to the restaurant in the dark with a little flashlight was a huge pothole, but no one fell in. So we managed to go around the pothole and get to the restaurant. And then the rule for departure is the buses can pick you up at the restaurant. So we didn't have to go back. It's complicated. What we got here, there's a flower pot that these are all from 2025, February. There's a flower pot on the left, that a beautiful flower pot in the private restaurant. There's me in the back seat of the blue and white convertible. And it cost $100 to take that car on a tour for 1 hour. And the average Cuban, I'm just going to break it out to you. The average Cuban is earning $18 a month, and that means that $100 is close to a year's salary. The Cubans are not riding in those cars. There's Havana Club. You can get it in all the tourist areas. The Cubans are not drinking Havana Club. And my favorite beer, Cristal. And I told a tale about Cristal last night at dinner, but we won't have time for it because it's complicated. So, a little Cuban history. In your grandparents, when they were alive, the day that will live in infamy for them is, what is it? It's 15 May 1888. That's when the USS Maine battleship was sunk It says in Havana Harbor, but it's not in Havana Harbor. If you look at the picture in my Google groups, I sent you a picture of where that ship was parked out in the bay. It's more like, if you've cruised, it's more like a tenderage, where the tenders get down, then you go into some sort of port. It's an anchorage, it's not a harbor. We know the powder magazine blew up. No one knows why. The U.S. blamed Spain, and there is a monument. There's the monument to the sinking of the Maine. Teddy Roosevelt went to Santiago de Cuba, rode up San Juan Hill. I have been up and down San Juan Hill. Now it has two parts to it. In some parts it looks like when you're on on John and Thomas, you have that huge cliff that drops to the street below. That's not what he rode up. What he rode up was a very steadily, gradually rising hill, say from Lake Union to Mirabella. That's the distance. That's what he rode up with his charge. The Spanish surrendered on the spot because they did not want to surrender to the Cubans' pride. The U.S. took the country for 2 years, and in 1899 or 1900, the new president that was controlled by the agricultural companies of Cuba, U.S. agricultural companies, took over, and they granted us Guantanamo Bay in perpetuity, not for 100 years, not for 50 years, forever. And Castro, even in the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, honored that treaty and would not attack Guantanamo. So, we had about 3 or 4 presidents, all corrupt. The last one's name was Batista, and he was not only controlled by the U.S. company interests, he was controlled by the mafia. Again, if you look at that picture in today's Google groups, you'll see the Montalban. Oh God, I've lost the name of it. It slipped my mind. The street along the coast. The mafia was going to turn that into the Las Vegas Strip, and they had built the first hotel, the Riviera, opened it 2 months before Castro got there. He confiscated the property along with all the property. That's what pure Marxist communism is, 100% state-owned. There's no choice. You work for the state. A lot of people I know are heard stories from, like they had a jewelry shop in downtown Havana. It was confiscated and they were given a choice. They lost their inventory, they lost their building, and they were given the option of coming back and working for $50 a month, selling their inventory, and then the state, when they sold it out, would replace it and they could continue working for $50 a month, or they could leave the country. And that's when the first exodus in 1959, 58, 59, 60 took place. So we have Fidel in 59, pure communist with Che, and we'll cover what types of policies he was into. And then in 2008, his brother Raul Castro took over. He started privatization in Cuba, so we started drifting away from pure communism, and we'll cover some of the reasons a little later on. And the first privatization, when I was there in 2012, they had just started 125 professions that people could own and work and enjoy the profits, and one of them was picking coconuts from trees in Cuba. And as a result, in the Philippines, the coconuts are picked by monkeys. But in Cuba, they're picked by people working for private companies. And then we have the present. And I was there in 2019, about a month before they closed the country. Havana was founded in 1520. They were planning to have the 500th anniversary. I don't know what happened because There are no newspapers in Cuba currently. They used to use the newspapers for toilet paper because it was controlled by the government, and they still do have toilet paper that, newspapers that is used as toilet paper, because there is toilet paper in Cuba. It only costs 50 cents a roll, but it's scarce. Then we had COVID, we had the hurricanes, and we had Miguel Diaz Canal that basically is running the country on empty. It's a country on empty. They cannot provide the services promised. This 20-minute video will be released after the presentation tonight. See why I think. Hello. Oh, well, I didn't realize I had it. We could have watched it. Well, we can't. We don't have time. But if we do have time, if I rush through too fast, we'll play some of the video. I am now telling you that Cuba is a heaven for tourists. I have never been so thrilled with a tour that I've taken as I was with all four, and especially this last one. You can pick your favorite word for how you're treated by the Cubans. You can be a god, like a Greek god. You can be a king or queen. You can be a goose who lays golden eggs. Let me just say, the Cuban people are naturally very friendly and will interact with you extremely well. But you have what they need really badly. That's called foreign currency. And this is a bar at a palatar called the Cha-Cha-Cha that was opposite the art museum. So we toured the art museum with a guide speaking to the various employees at the art museum. Remember, people to people, talk to the Cubans. You just don't go through and look at pictures. With a guide, you got to interact with the staff. And we went across, and this is the bar. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bacardis. Bacardis in Cuba is not Bacardis everywhere else. It's the original. And those sevens are ages. There's a whole bunch of rums. These are drinking rums. These are not for mojitos. That's the threes and the ones. The ones, which there are none, would cost maybe 50 cents for a bottle of rum. Things are cheap. You go to Cuba and you get incredible quality at McDonald's prices. But these rums are a little more expensive. They might be $1 to get a glass of any of these rums. And the food. But let's talk about tourist heaven. I was warned by lots and lots of people, including Cubans in Miami. I wanted to have a picture of the Cuban philosophy of Cubans in Miami. And I had a friend who worked with Cubans, so I was able to meet them. And let me tell you, without exception, they hate the communist government of Cuba. Because their family is down there struggling, and they, because it's a strong Cuban family system, they have to provide support to them. And we'll talk about how that support is provided when we get to the Cuban side of it. But it's safe. No, it's not safe at night. Why? Do you remember why it's not safe at night? Potholes with no street lights. Otherwise, you can walk. Oh, there's a new challenge. It's very aggressive begging. I was shocked how aggressive the beggars were. As I was going from one hotel to another hotel after dark to have my dinner, I was approached by 3 beggars, and one guy was obviously mentally impaired. And there are plenty of those people on the streets. And their goal is to get dollars. And I did encounter, just walking around during the day, numerous scam artists. They have restaurants, they have all types. You name it, they're offering it to you because they need the tips to live. But it's safe. You're not going to have any challenges in Cuba as a tourist. The food is better. It cost, each meal I had cost 1 month's wages for a Cuban. We found 4,000 to 5,000 Cuban pesos, which is equivalent to $18. So you're eating at restaurants that are better, and I know you won't believe this, but I'm telling you, the restaurants, these paladars, the private restaurants in Cuba are better than anything we have in Seattle at McDonald's prices. If you consider a meal that includes rice, beans, and you can see this is pork, beef, lobster, all type, plantain chips. I would gather up all the plantain chips and take them home with me. They are so good. All of that for 18 bucks. The hotels are lovely. They're on the top tour I was on, they're all called 5-star. They're really 3.5 to 4-star hotels, but they're very nice. There's no problems, except, of course, for the elevators. The elevators tend to break in Cuba, and when they break in Cuba, they stay broken for a very long time because the parts have to be imported. Now, the hotels have the foreign currency, but is there the skilled labor to do the repair? I'm not so sure. Colors. Cuba is famous for its colors, and the freshly painted buildings are incredible. The faded color buildings are incredible. It's really colorful. Watch the video. American cars. I don't know, at $100 for an hour, how many times do you need to drive a car around? And by the way, it's all diesel. They're diesel, and it stinks. And you're driving surrounded by diesel fumes. Not healthy. And community groups. Well, that's part of the people-to-people tour. And maybe, oh, no, we'll get to some community tours later on. This is Vanales, and this is a very much of a resort area. It only has one minor problem. We did mention, oh, I didn't go through the negatives. Okay, daily blackouts, real. In Havana, it's 4 hours by district. Every day you're blacked out for 4 hours. Your hotel has, well, what's that word? Generators. Your hotel has generators. The restaurants have generators. Are they cooking on charcoal and wood? Had that too. There's some emergency lights in every building, like one bulb by law, Cuban law. But for the most part, when the lights are out, it's generated. But unfortunately, once you leave Cuba, in Vanales, the lights are on 1 hour a day. And we'll talk about the consequences of 1 hour a day. Dollars. Tourists use dollars. You don't need to convert to coops. If you're not going, I know there are people here that feel they have to live on the economy and get there and buy their food from the markets, then you're going to need some Cuban pesos. You're going to get them anywhere on the black market. The official government rate is 110 or so to the dollar. The banks are closed as a result because the black market is good for your dollar, is going to give you 350 to 400, 300 to 400 Cuban pesos to the dollar. So you're selling it to the bank, or you're going to a market and selling it to someone there with a roll of Cuban pesos. Make sure they're real, and you better know what Cuban pesos look like if you're trading money. That's a scam. But I use dollars. I converted no money. They were grateful to have dollars because the Cubans have the opposite problem. They get paid in Cuban pesos, and to buy anything, they need dollars. So they want your dollars badly. And that's a change. In 2019, it was a two-currency system, and dollars were illegal. That has all changed now. It's all dollars. And I believe Cuban pesos are going to be outlawed next, and it's going to be all dollars. No restrictions whatsoever. Go anywhere. Take pictures as you desire. Total freedom. This is not like North Korea where you have guides staring at you. This is not like China when I went back in the 90s. This is, you do what you want to do. You can go anywhere, it's safe, you can talk to anybody they want to talk to, you can interact with them. There are no restrictions whatsoever, and you can see how beautiful this tourist resort area is. That's our top tour group. Before I go to Cuba, let me simply summarize it. Incredible. You want an incredible adventure. This is assuming that you like to enjoy luxury at McDonald's prices. If you don't enjoy that, if you insist on suffering with the locals, we'll get to that. I'll get to that situation in a moment. But if you like a luxurious, cheap, where you can get meals, best meals you've ever had for $15, $20 a person, including all you can drink, all you can eat, wonderful servers, because these guys, the servers, are getting tipped, and they absolutely need your money, and they don't want to be without it. That's, tourism is heaven. Now we will proceed to the four freedoms. Time for Chase Cap again. Free medical care. And I talked to someone who had medical care in 1990. Now that's under Fidel. In medical care in 1990, he was still saying they didn't have medicines that he really needed, but they had great doctors, which they still do, sort of. But they didn't have the medicines back then. Even in 2012, if you wanted aspirin or Tylenol, you brought it with you because you're not going to buy it in Cuba. And it is still free. Oh, glasses. We all wear glasses. Let's talk about glasses. You need a new pair of glasses in Cuba. Remember, it's free. So you go in and you've got a nice wait to see an optometrist. They get your prescription, and now you have a mandatory 3 years. And by the way, these are not made up stories. I'm talking to locals telling me the story about their glasses. I saw our driver of the American automobile that was holding his glasses together in his hands, in one hand, because they were falling apart, and he was driving our car in the other. That was a little scary, but there are no cars on the road. There's a fuel shortage. So anyway, 3 years, and now if your eyesight changes during the 3 years, too bad, you get what you were prescribed 3 years ago. Free education. Yes, it's free, it's plentiful, but let's say you want to go to college. All of us went to college. Cuba is a little more complicated about college, and the reason is that every year the state determines how many degrees of each type they're going to offer, and it's merit-based, so the top student in Cuba will get his choice, or her choice, rather her choice, from the available degrees. But once that, so let's say you want to be a lawyer, there might be, there's not a big call for lawyers in a communist state. So there might be 2 lawyer openings, because someone has to die, literally, to create an opening. So if you're in the top 2 and you want that, you can have it. The tourist professions, which is foreign languages, travel agent school, those are probably the most sought out because you can make a living doing that. So that's free education, and once the college degrees run out, you're not going to college. But the Army wants you. There's a year of mandatory service. Equal income. This is the basic story of equal income. It's called equally poor, with the state providing your needs according to, well, just providing your needs. In 1959, everyone got $50 a month. In 2012, 14, and 19, it was still $50 a month, but I started to see a little bit of wage creep by 2014. Suddenly, they were paying doctors another $10 a month. and baseball players were making a lot more. So there are professions that get more money. Art, of course, private, real money. Someone said $5,000 for this flag. It's 15, which is a month's wages, but with inflation. Oh, I should tell you, this is German Weimar runaway inflation time. While I was there, the Cuban peso is devaluating every single day. The 50 pesos are now 5,000. That's a 1,000% devaluation in 6 years. And it was devaluating by 5% a week or something. The rates had changed while I was there. So equal income, in theory only, and genders and races equal. Yes, slavery in Cuba was abolished very late by the Spanish in the 1880s. And the reason there was slavery is there's no gold, there's no minerals, there's no industry. So the Spanish decided to grow sugarcane. And sugar was the only industry in Cuba. And they needed slaves to do it. That's how the slaves got there. And they were freed from slavery in the 1880s. And now think the South after the Civil War. That's exactly what happened in Cuba. They were free, but they weren't being treated. And I put a test in my mind when I went to the very first time in 2012, repeated in 14, 19, and 25. I said, I will count the number of women behind the desk at the hotel check-in, and I'll count the number of blacks. Anyone care to venture how many females and blacks I saw during my 4 visits? Yes, Laura has it correct. 0. There is still, even in name, there is gender and race equality by Cuban law, but it isn't. And of course, there's no such thing as freedom of speech. Though, I noticed in 19, the Cubans were becoming more vocal about their situation. And when you listen to the video, not my video, perhaps a little bit of my video, but if you listen to the other video I'm releasing, taken of the people of Cuba, you'll see they're not happy. So there is some sort of freedom of speech, but you can't go into Revolutionary Square and yell it out. Okay, this is the elephant in the room, the embargo. This is what the Cubans blame for their problem, and I've seen it even in newspapers. If you see an article about Cuba in the Wall Street Journal or wherever you see it, the Miami Herald, if you go look at it, you'll see the Cubans are blaming the embargo. This is a Chinese cartoon. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK, started the embargo in '62. 11 presidents to varying degrees have kept the embargo in place. Some, like Obama, made it a little less of a struggle. And as a result, that's why I went in 2012. Tour groups could open. Trump tightened it up. Biden really tightened it up. Whoever was doing Cuban foreign policy for the U.S., in the U.S., had a real hatred for the Cuban people because Cuba has had, since Fidel's time, when the Russians left in 91, since 91, Cuba has 2 industries, and only 2. That's all they're making. Cigars and rum. And when the Russians stopped buying the sugar, 90% of the fields in Cuba are barren. Nothing's growing. They don't grow. That's not true in Pinellas, where they're growing vegetables and tobacco. So anyway, that's the embargo. And like I said, Obama made it better and made it easier to go. Still had to keep those written records, but my 6 years is up for my first 3 visits. And Trump and Biden increased it, and there's no apparent change. And when you're in Cuba, rumors run raft. And I was just landed in Cuba, and then suddenly I heard in the group a rumor, Trump's about to cancel nonstop flights between Miami and Havana. And so I said to the guy, how are we getting back? She said, oh, we'll get you back through Mexico or through Jamaica or something like that. But it was a rumor, totally false. We'll talk about why we have those nonstop flights in a second. Fidel had Russia. Communism is a failed state to begin with. No successful communist countries practicing pure state ownership. So Fidel's idea was to get Russia to lend him money, and they lent him a lot of money. And you know how much Fidel has ever paid back Russia on those loans? We're back to that same zero. And then Russia left in '91 in the first troubled times. They say, no one knows, 500,000 people starved to death in Cuba due to lack of food. Raul was able to pick up Venezuela to give him loans and money and oil and fuel, and things were pretty good. I actually saw in the paladars, the private restaurants, local Cubans eating there. There are no local Cubans unless they're members of the Communist Party eating in the paladars today. And then Venezuela, after Chavez died, and there were placards about Chavez everywhere. So instead of paying back Venezuela, they just put up another billboard with Chavez's picture and said, long live Chavez. It was everywhere. There are none of those left. They're gone. In fact, the first time I went, there were lots of propaganda posters everywhere. They're all gone. They've fallen in disrepair. It's just not there. You wouldn't know you were in a communist country unless you knew you were in a communist country. So anyway, Canal is unable to borrow money. That means the state cannot provide the free medicine, the free education and the free food that was promised. So, my God, I'm almost out of time, so we're going to go fast. I will not talk about ration cards because I'll just say the ration stores cannot provide, the government is not able to provide the rations at low prices. The latest thing I read on Cuba, just a couple of days ago, they're going to abolish the ration stores. This is how the people live on $50 a month. Remember, they're now living on 12. It's dropping by as inflation. So they're just getting rid of them. And they had secondary stores if you couldn't buy enough of beans and rice and oil and a little bit of chicken. That's about all you can afford on a ration card. And I think you got some rum and a cigar or two. That's all gone. The wages, you can see, what is that? There was a 20% devaluation in the 6 days I was there. The largest bill in Cuba is the 1,000 peso bill. It's worth $4, maybe $3 now. And wages are now at $12, I was reading recently. So now, if the government will raise the state wages, and by the way, this is state wages, talking about the big people, we got the Communist Party members, about 6% of the population. They're doing just fine, don't worry about that. We have the private businesses, owners, they're doing fine, don't worry about that. We have the people that work in the private businesses. We're up to about, say, 25% of the people, they're doing fine, don't worry about that. They're not making $12 or $16 a month, they're making $1,000. And it may be much more. That's why you get such incredible service in the restaurants. This is a gold mine job. They aren't going to lose it with poor service. And the black market. Black market's always played a relief valve. Now it's really there. Internet is priced in dollars. the internet was good. Venezuela built the system, it's good. I had internet in the hotel, I wasn't blocked on anything I was trying to do. And if you want to eat today, you're going to have to buy your food on the private markets. And this is what they look like. These are the vegetables, their meat stores, their bread. Apparently, in Cuba, there are shortages. And I think I will go give you one shortage story so you can feel the pain I felt through the shortages. It wasn't the blackouts. It wasn't the lack of food. At the hotel, I had powdered eggs for the first 3 days. How many of you have ever had powdered eggs? They're horrible. It's horrible. Powdered egg omelet. Oh my God. Then on day 4, real eggs showed up suddenly. And it was like heaven. I felt so happy to be able to have real eggs. And I said, where'd the real eggs come from? And they said, oh, the ship arrived. Every single item in Cuba is imported, 100%. So they wait for ships, and when the ships come in, you suddenly have things. That's the story with toilet paper. When the toilet paper runs out, it's called newspapers, if you can find them. I don't know what they're going to use. And then the toilet paper, you can buy it cheaply, 50 cents. Medical collapsed. I told you about the glasses. I will tell you, the doctors are quitting, and if you get sick in Cuba and you need surgery, even in the main hospital, you're going to have to provide 100% of everything. That's the anesthesia, the IVs, the bandages, and you can't find any of that in Cuba. It doesn't exist. You're going to need, oh, that's the final category of people doing well, those that have connections with relatives in southern Florida. So, right now, 88% of the population lives in extreme poverty. It was 216, I'm sure it's dropping by the day. But look at that picture of the tobacco factory. This is the impact of 1 hour of electricity a day. It's plenty light in there, but some of the tobacco industry requires electricity for cooling the leaves and heating the leaves. It's a quarter full. What happened to the rest of the people employed by that factory? In the good old days, they would have found another job. Today, they're on the streets, unemployed. The fat in Cuba is gone, and now the starvation is about to begin, I'm afraid. It's really dark there. So, how do they get the workouts? If you got family in Cuba, the postal system is gone. There's no way to send money. The banks are closed. There's no way to send money. What you do is you get on one of these scheduled flights, and that's a visa easy to get, and you fly down there with these blue bags that I saw everywhere in Miami and everywhere at the Havana airport, and you bring dollars. They cap it at 5,000, but that's 5 years worth of wages, so that's plenty. And you give them cash in dollars, and you give them stuff in the blue bags. And or you leave Cuba. So that's the other choice, and that's where the population went. They just picked up and left. Some of them came through Mexico, some of them sold their house and were able to fly there. There is a little bit of hope. Countries like China and Mexico and Spain are still helping. Though in its infinite understanding, I just read that Cuba is now going to not allow these hotels that house the tourists that they desperately need to take their profits out of Cuba. So we'll see how that plays. So what do we got? We got shortages of everything, and I mean everything. Food, hygiene products, medicines, fuels, long lines. That's what most Cubans do. They stand in long lines all day long. And if there's nothing in the store, they put a 0 on the door so you don't waste your time standing in line. Gas stations, there maybe were 1,000 gas stations, there are 3 of them that are open at any time. It's very hard to get fuel unless you're paying for currencies, daily power outages, and people are relying on very limited sources in imports. So, is Cuba heaven and hell for Cubans in 2025? That's the presidential palace that spent 10 years revitalizing that. It is lovely in Midtown. If you really wish to help the average Cuban, get on a tour and go down there. I'm serious. That's the only way to really help. And you pack your suitcase with goodies, and you give them out to everyone you see. And that's what you do. You hand out, and you take nothing from Cuba except your body, and you leave everything you brought with you except for the suitcase to the Cubans. And that's how you help Cuba. And I'll be going back. Now we're ready for Q&A.